Welcome, welcome, welcome. Get settled, get settled. We are about to start. All right, everybody. Thank you and welcome. Thank you all for attending the 8th annual Startup Boston Week. My name is Elena, and I will be your host for this session. Want to give a humongous thank you to Suffolk University, Sawyer's Business School for hosting this conference. As many of you have noticed arriving, this downtown location is really the perfect hub for exploring Boston's innovation ecosystem and learning from industry leaders. So that's what we're here to do today. To ensure everybody is in the correct spot, the session about to kick off is to PIP or not to PIP. That is the question. Good, everybody's in the right space. I love it, I love it, I love it. Fantastic. Now, the goal behind Startup Boston Week is to connect the entire greater Boston and New England startup community, all industries, all startup departments, and all bootstrapped and funding stages for 5 straight days of learning and connecting with one another. The team that creates Startup Boston Week is primarily volunteer, and the folks working the conference today here are volunteering their time as well, including our wonderful panelists. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you all, attendees, for attending this conference. It is a labor of love, and we appreciate you playing a role in shaping our startup community. Now, don't be fooled. I know there are more people in that picture than are up on stage. However, we've got a lively bunch. We've got a wonderful set of panelists for you today. And as such, things are a little bit shifted. We will be open to taking questions during this session to keep things a little bit more lively and interactive. So if anything comes top of mind, we will also still reserve roughly 10-15 minutes at the end for open Q&A. So anything that comes up, let us know. We'll run around with some mics. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it off to our wonderful panelist, Mike.
Thank you so much, Elena. We are really excited to be here. Like she said, we have had a little bit of a shuffle, so bear with us a bit, but we are excited to talk about performance improvement plans, and excited to hear what questions and thoughts you all have to as we get rolling here. So my name is Mike Cohn. I'm the Chief People Officer at Kevel. I'm going to be facilitating our panel today, and I'm going to ask our folks here to do a quick round of intros. If y'all could share your name, a little bit of background on your company and your role, and I like to do an icebreaker and would love to just start with what's a piece of feedback that you received at some point in your career, whether constructive or positive, that that has stuck with you. Lexi, do you want to go first?
Sure. Is it okay? Great. Hi, I'm Lexi. I'm the director of people operations at Kitopin. We're a life sciences biotech startup out in Central Square. My niche is in sort of starting HR departments from scratch. So I've been a one-person HR team for my whole career. And a piece of feedback that I've received that sticks with me regularly is that I'm too sellable. So I'm really, it's really easy to convince me to buy things or to do things or to get me on your side. So I work really hard at my poker face. Yeah.
I'm Jenna Weinstein. I lead people operations at Full Story. We are a software company that's based in Atlanta, but a lot of remote folks. Close to the mic, sorry. And we are about 400 people. So we have an HR team of 6 right now. And the most, I would say, the highest impact piece of feedback I got was earlier in my career where somebody said, I need to actually be able to give you feedback for you to get better. And you seem resistant to it right now. And so it was a helpful reminder that feedback is a gift. And when it's given from somebody who you trust and who has your best interest in mind, it can unlock all kinds of good stuff for you. So I've tried to keep that in mind.
Love it. And I, just for some more context on me, I work for about 100-person company. We have folks in the US, in Portugal, in the UK, and around the world. And so a lot of what I end up dealing with on this topic has, as much to do with feedback from a human perspective as it does compliance and legal regulations really all over the world, and trying to keep that in check as we go. Our HR people team is small but mighty. We've got 3 folks, including myself. And one piece of feedback that has stuck with me also came early in my career. I was gung-ho about some of the HR initiatives that we had, and my VP of HR sort of stopped me and really helped me to understand that there's a bigger picture going on, that HR does not really exist for HR purposes. You're trying to serve the greater business and really be a partner with everybody. And that has stuck with me, I think, in many aspects of what I do, that the global picture of what's happening is the most important piece. How do things support one another? How do things work together? And I think that plays a lot into how we give feedback to one another.
Mhm.
Well, I'll and forgive me for using my phone to keep track of some of the questions that I had prepped here, but curious from you both, do you feel like PIPs are an effective way to provide feedback and guide employees towards improvement? Would love, and Jenna, maybe you can start us off here.
Yeah, it was. I think the one thing that appealed to me about this panel was the title, because I don't believe it's a like yes or no, only this, only that. I think when I think about what the concept is behind a performance improvement plan, have the expectations been made really clear to the employee, and have the stakes been made really clear? And I think sometimes we do the expectations part, but we don't do the stakes part. And so the person has not heard your employment will be at risk if we do not improve here. And so I think at the point you get to that, improvement is hard, right? Like, you're already at the place where you're contemplating the person not working at the company anymore. But I have seen also when it's early enough, right? When the manager is able to have that conversation at the first inkling of a challenge, rather than once it's so far gone. And I've seen that folks really do say, "Oh, I didn't know," right? Or I needed help in this area, and folks are able to turn it around. But I do think at the point where if I don't, I'm so frustrated, and I'm so I've lost so much trust this person can deliver. At that point, I don't think we're in improvement zone anymore.
Yeah, I echo everything Jenna said. I think the only thing I would add is there's a cultural piece to it too. If your culture has been built such that PIPs always lead to termination, they're not going to be a helpful way to correct feedback if you actually want that outcome. And so if you're an early stage startup and you haven't had any performance issues yet, I would suggest like building into your culture that PIPs are exactly that, right? It's an action plan meant to help people improve, rather than, a death sentence toward termination. Because it also, the rest of the employees who are not on PIPs are also watching sort of how that's unfolding, and the person on a PIP is talking to their colleagues about it. And it's, optically can make a big impact.
One of the things I really struggle with PIPs is that just saying the acronym PIP scares people.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh my God, I'm on a PIP, or oh my God, we're talking about a PIP. It just freaks people out. If you break it down into what it actually is, it is meant to be a feedback mechanism. It is supposed to be, hey, how do we set you on the right path? I totally agree with what you were just saying, that it just depends what the use case of them is. Is it a road determination and it's inevitable? Okay, great. The PIP is just the documentation along the way. But, if it's the kind of thing where you say, great, this is the tool, maybe it has value. I honestly kind of hate them because everybody knows that a PIP is terrible. And so I try not to use them as much as possible. Yeah, go ahead.
Because people have seen as a majority of people does lead to termination. If the perception, you can turn around and see that if it's not lead to termination, people will stop having the fear, seeing that it positively, or maybe even change the name of PIP or it's a feedback process. I think in order to change the impression or perception of PIP, the outcome of PIP is important. People get on PIP, they will start looking, or eventually, the reason you have a high unsuccess rate is most people don't complete the PIP, then they quit. But even the success rate in my past company generally less than 30% who was successfully
get out of PIP. You don't even need to say, oh, PIP is for you to improve. But in the end, the outcome is what people see.
Right. 100% agree. And you know, Lexi, you were talking about this earlier, and I was kind of curious to get your take with this in mind, of what we were saying in mind. Like, what do you think is the way to address that from a culture standpoint? Like, do you create this culture of mistrust by using PIPs? How do you avoid that? Like, would love your take on that.
Yeah, I feel like the way to avoid it is to only use PIPs when you believe that there's a realistic path to improvement, right? Like I think, and this is sort of to what you were saying earlier, Jenna, like if you're at the point where like the manager is just like throwing their hands up and saying like, I'm done with this person, like, can we just fire them tomorrow? And you're as HR saying like, no, like we need to document. That's not really a good use of a PIP as documentation, because that like, as you were saying, sort of puts a negative connotation on something that isn't by nature a negative thing. So yeah, I think that would sort of be my advice, is to like, there are other ways to provide performance feedback or gather documentation on poor performance without having to call it a PIP. And then you don't sort of, muddy the name of performance improvement plans.
The one piece that we've struggled with in everywhere I've worked is the idea of how do you avoid the person feeling surprised?
Yeah.
And so whether, we sometimes say like, well, it's not necessarily a PIP if I'm just saying, here's what I need done by this time, and here's how we'll check it along the way. Like, you don't even need to label it as that. But I have found whenever I don't explicitly say the words, and this is when we are going to check back in on your performance to know whether you can work here anymore, the person's inevitably shocked when the exit happens. And then that I have found leads to mistrust on, well, is that going to happen to me? Like, is it just going to be any random Tuesday and I'm going to walk in and my manager is going to fire me? So that's where I find them as somewhat trust builders, of saying there is a process. You will know at the point where your employment is at risk, because I'm going to tell you those things and I'm going to put those words in writing. Whether you call it a PIP or not, but that's something we've toyed with to just understand the best approach.
Yeah. And that's really hard, by the way, like, especially for folks who are not HR, like, ideally that message is coming from your manager, right? And it's like, they don't have to do that regularly. It's not something they signed up to do. And so it's really hard to like convince them to do it, and B, train them to do it the right way. So it's I just wanted to acknowledge that is difficult.
How much of this is a branding issue? Like, is this an issue of it's a terrible name and it freaks people out because it's a bad brand, versus like the concepts behind it are bad? Like, where do you fall on that?
I literally was like just about to say we need to rebrand. Like, they definitely need a big rebrand for sure. Yeah, I think it's more about the practice. Like, the name of stuff doesn't matter. What matters is how people are experiencing it, right? And like what people are seeing as the outcome. So if people are afraid of the word PIP, like, why? I don't know. I try not to use it because people are afraid of it. And so why would I create that extra anxiety when we could just sit down and have a conversation about like, hey, you're here, you need to be here. And if you're not here by this time, your employment is at risk. That's basically what a PIP is. So why would you call it that if it's going to freak people out more?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had an experience because I think there's also a like leadership management perception versus the employee perception. I had a leader say to me about someone who wasn't a direct report, is so-and-so on a performance plan? And I had to be like, I don't know what you mean by that. Like, what are you looking for? Oh, are we ready to coach them out of the organization? Was effectively the underlying question. And I had to say, well, we've given them feedback. We talked about this, but I wouldn't say they're on a performance plan. They're not on a time-bound thing. Basically, the issues were we needed to reset expectations, to your point, Jenna, and we needed to say, this is an ongoing thing that you need to follow. Is that a performance plan? I don't really think so. That is look, these are expectations for what you need to do. We need to course correct, and that's indefinite. There's not a 60-day window in which you need to change. And go figure, the person got the feedback, understood what the expectations were, and has been great ever since. So much of this is, okay, if we're doing the work to give the feedback appropriately, and then we see the change, isn't that what this is? But if we'd called it a PIP, that person probably would have been gone. They would have said, okay, I'm going to get fired. I don't want to do this. Or we would have basically set them up for failure. So I'm curious, like, do you have experiences like that, good or bad, where it worked out or it didn't work out?
Yeah, the two examples that reminds me of, one is, I've had managers say, I need you to perform on this, right? Because otherwise I have an opening, right? Like, nobody wants the exit. They want the performance to go back to expectations. And so that helps, right? When everybody's best interest is to keep the person retained and doing the job well. And so that can, I think, help, to your point, in that framing. I do think, one of the things practically that, if I put myself in the exec shoes, there is a forward planning, right? If I know the person's not going to be here, then I need to start thinking about how I'm going to backfill the role, and I might reorg the team as a result of that. And so I do understand, from an exec perspective, the need for some clarity on, do we think this person's going to be here in 6 months? Because I need to plan for that. And so sometimes having the clarity of how the performance is going and whether we think it will, what the timeline for improvement could look like, I think is valuable.
Yeah. I think what came to mind for me is when someone comes to me already decided that they want to coach someone out of the organization and they ask me about a PIP. I think that's where it gets tough. Because that, like, what should have been happening all along is, like, they're documenting, instances of poor performance or bad behavior or, et cetera. And they've come to me with this folder of documentation and they're saying, like, hey, here's all my evidence. I'm ready to terminate this person. And so I think the vocabulary is, there's some confusion around it, and getting them to sort of undecide and then reform a decision is pretty difficult. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's sort of what came to mind for me when you were asking that.
So what do you? I'll come back to you in just a second. I'm super curious. What do you do in that situation? Because on the one hand, it's like, oh, you've already decided, is this really worth the energy to go through this and convince them, and then it's inevitable anyway? Or do you stick to the principle and say, like, no, this is bad practice, I'm not going to let you do this? Like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, with execs, it's tough, right? Like, no offense to any execs.
Hey.
I think, right, my approach is to outline the options, right? Like, I personally don't find it respectful to put an employee on a PIP if we've already decided that they're going to be terminated. Like, that's just not fair. And it wastes everybody's time and energy. And so usually I'll try to go with the approach of, like, well, if we fire them, are they going to be surprised? And usually the answer is like, well, I've, like, had some conversations with them. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, have you documented them? Like, do you have a one-on-one document that you've written feedback in? Like, do you follow up on emails? And they're like, no, not really. Like, we have some Slack, back and forths and whatever. And so usually my recommendation is to hold on the termination and give it a few more weeks for them to, like, sit down and have a, come to Jesus conversation with this person and say, like, hey, like, I'm really, not pleased with your performance. If it doesn't get better, then, we're going to have a different conversation. And typically, they'll go either one of two ways. They'll say, I don't have time to do that. So let's just move forward with the termination. And then they're shocked when the employee is also shocked. Or they say, okay, yeah. And then I'm able to coach them through, like, how to have that conversation, how to document it. And it just provides a little bit more, honestly, like, room for the employee in question to, like, start looking for a job, or improve, right? That's the best case scenario.
Jenny,
but it's a lot of coaching.
It's exact same.
Yeah.
Have you had this? Do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, it's the same playbook I've used. Yeah. I mean, the one thing we built in the past couple of years is we have performance cycles, formal ones twice a year, and then we do twice a year informal ones that's just between the manager and their manager, where it's a spreadsheet. Like, it's the simplest possible thing of on track, not on track. And that gives us a chance to, as the HR team, intervene to say, hey, you noted that they weren't on track. What's your next step? Right? As opposed to waiting for the formal performance cycle when the stakes feel much higher. And it's, so that's helped to at least get some intervention in so that they don't wait so long. But no, that's the class. I mean, yes, I've said those words so many times.
I'll also add I totally agree with what you both said. I'll add that's one of the things that I try and play up is not just the impact on the person, but what is the impact on your high performers that are staying at the organization? If you do this out of nowhere to someone, what message are you telling your great people? How is this going to be received by the rest of the team? What is our practice? And I mean, I have intervened and been like, no, as an organization, we have to be able to stand behind this. Will never catch you by surprise. We will never do this out of nowhere. Like, no, I will not let you do this. But that's taken a little bit of time.
Yeah, geez, could you teach me how to do that?
Question up here.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for being here. I'm really appreciating this panel because I'm a 3-time founder, and we've founded from 2 to 3 people. Moving through the stages where you're like at 10, 12, your span of control starts to really change. I'm surprised this room is not packed because I think this is a critical thing for startup founders to think through. And I'm sorry to give so much context, but I'm going to get to the question, which is, it's a critical thing to think through because when you make your early hires, those jobs change so rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And so the expectations and the stakes change so rapidly. And so the question is, can you speak more to that side of it, please? Like, how do you navigate that? Because this was so hard for me, and it led me to fires that I didn't want to make. And it was just heartbreaking because the person was like, I was doing really good at the beginning. And I was like, yeah, you were doing great, but everything's changed. We've raised money, we've raised venture money. So can you speak a little bit more to that? Maybe some anecdotes, some things that you can think about at that stage, not the 100, but the 2 to 10 to 20 to 25.
For sure.
Okay.
I can take this if you want. I'm working with a team right now who he's a founder with 2 full-time employees and a bunch of co-ops. And he is going through that right now, right? Like he hired his first employee who happened to be awesome, right? Like the unicorn does anything he asks and learns really quickly and takes initiative. And he hired his second employee and was expecting the exact same thing. And that's just not how life works. And so we went through that exactly what you were just saying, right? Like he's like, well, he started off good. But then I guess like maybe I wasn't as clear enough with my expectations, or my expectations have changed. So now I guess I have to fire him. And I was able to intervene and be like, well, how clear have you been about your expectations and like how often they're going to change? Because when you're that size, like you need to be hiring people who are adaptable and resilient to change. And B, you need to be on top of like sharing what your expectations are because they can't read your mind. And they're also, it's not their baby, it's not their company, oftentimes, right? So they're not going to be able to intuitively know what the needs are if you're not telling them. So I think in a company that size, you should be talking every day about like your expectations or course correcting, so that you don't have to have a larger conversation when it gets when the frustration gets too heightened.
I'll add, I think from a different lens, a lot of the hires that you make at different stages are good for the stages that they're in, and you're sort of wondering, can they make it beyond that? Are they the right fits? Are we the right fits for each other? And just myself as an example, like I'm not a great Series A hire. Like I don't want to go back to being a 1-person team that has like, so many hats to wear. Lexi, I think so much of what you were saying is like, you love that like building stage of cool. Let's build it out from the beginning. I like the Series C zone that I'm in right now.
We already built.
Yeah, exactly. Like the thing is there. How do we scale it? How do we take it there? And you can apply that to a lot of the things that you're thinking about. Like at our organization now, we have one of our leaders has been with the company for 9 years, has clearly seen a lot of growth along the way, is the wrong fit for the next phase of growth. And so our founder and I have been having these conversations. He is the right person on the bus, but he's in the wrong seat. So how do we navigate to that? You don't always have that luxury, but being able to consider, are there other opportunities in the organization? Because yeah, he is that person. We're going to move him into a different role and rehire for that role because we need it. I've also had the experience where you bring someone on at Series A, they do a good job, but like they are not the right person on the bus anymore. And so you say, great, we need to part ways and have that conversation. I mean, it's sort of outside of the scope of PIPs in this context, because it's like there's not really anything to improve on. It's just like you've done a great job of getting us to this point. And so it all goes back to communication and conversation. Have we talked about that early and often? And can we find a way to make this mutually beneficial and exit from there?
The only other thing I would add, sorry, last thing, is especially at those early stages, those conversations should start like before you even start hiring people and implementing like, hey, what are our company values? Like, how do we make decisions here, and make that really clear in your hiring process? Because then you can also use that in those tough conversations, right? Like, hey, like we need someone who is able to do XYZ, and like that looked like this when we were seed stage, and it looks like this when we're Series A, and we don't think it's the right fit, right? Like setting those things up in advance and building that foundation makes it a lot easier in the future to have those tough conversations.
I think there was yeah.
Yes, thank you. So having been through a few startups myself, always as an individual contributor, I've definitely seen some of the pitfalls that you're talking about with management. And I think one of the ways this comes up is that you find a company that is, maybe they call it hyperscaling, but they're actually growing their company at a ridiculous pace, and very likely promoting people to be managers who don't have really any manager skills. They probably got promoted to managers because they were the best software developer. And so there's bound to be a lot of gaps in these sort of what you see as like core management really functions that need to be happening on an ongoing basis. So what would be your approach if you come into a company that has grown in this way? They don't have real management. Sorry to be so harsh, to put it so harshly, but like, what does it look like as a training plan for managers or like evaluation of whether these people should even be managers? And what kind of resources do you bring and recommend for the startup that you'd be helping?
I love the question. We only have 31 minutes, so.
Do you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd say 3 things off the bat. One is documenting your expectations for managing and making sure those are shared, right? And that, so at least we now have a job description for all those people so we can evaluate whether they are effective in managing. The second piece I have found works really well is to just bring them together and have them talk to each other, right? So one of the most effective manager sessions I've led a couple of times is we are just going to, coming back to our topic, we're going to script what it looks like to have a feedback conversation with somebody where you don't think it's going to end well, right? And we give them scripts and they role play it, and the actual having the words come across your tongue is some of, I think, the most valuable piece. And then the third part, if you can't afford external training, which I do think is really helpful because there's so many people who do this really well and you can just pay them to come in and help. But if you don't have that, there's, so many management books that you can do book clubs together and read about it. I think Google's old manager training is online. You can pull their actual session outlines. They've open sourced a lot of that stuff. So, that's some of the most fun work for me, is helping managers to be great, but reminding them that the power's in the room and they actually can help each other be better at it, can also go really far.
Yeah.
Ditto.
Yeah. I think, in my opinion, a startup should minimize PIP if possible, because true startups can't afford managers focusing on PIP. If we really see a PIP, both the company and the employee need to know we're in good faith. And in the end, it come out should have a high success rate. Otherwise, if it's and the result still high percentage going to lead to termination, in the end is a investment, also spending of your manager's time, employee time, if you come to the same result, you may better off to have intervention and employment rather than spend a little time, especially for startup standpoint. You don't have the luxury of larger company to spend this time to extend this time to actually have a success turnaround if the success rate is only 20%. And third thing I like to get your input is the point you brought up. Is a great hire in the very beginning. That's why when you do the hiring phase, you need to assess the person's adaptability, ability to learn, and when they move from Series A to Series C, if they are able to do that, you can have the dialogue whether the person is still with the company, you are able to move them to a different role that their skill set is able. I wouldn't say it's a performance issue, is their skill set mismatched. Their skill set is still needed. If it's not needed, you can part way, but still give them a good recognition. We have utilize your skill set to build a company, but now, unfortunately, within a company, there is no such a role for you. So it's a good way of sharing the feedback, and also the person would not feel is his performance.
Yeah. And I think there was another question back here in just a second. I think so much of this to me comes down to expectations and communication. And I feel like that's a shared trend between all of us. Much like pieces of software, the PIP is a tool. It's neither good nor bad. It's really like, what do you do with it? And we just have misused it as humans and organizations, and it just breeds lazy management in a lot of ways. This speaks to your question as well. That's like, if you have something to tell someone, the answer is tell them that, which sounds obvious, and like it's much harder in practice. But if you have feedback for someone, give it to them early and as soon as you possibly can, because if they don't understand that something is wrong, then how can they change? By the time you're getting to something like a PIP, hopefully you have the folder of documentation that says, look, I've had this conversation and it's not working. And then this is like a little bit of raising the oomph along the way to say, no. And Jen, I think you said this earlier. This isn't just like, hey, this is a casual problem. This is like, no, your job is at risk if you don't change. Whether you call that a PIP or not, it doesn't really matter. It's more like, are you actually moving someone along the way and letting them know this is where you stand and these are what the expectations are?
I guess it's my turn. Hi, thank you. So Ed's question. Well, I mean, obviously, what is a green flag for you in your experience watching other HR managers help put people in PIPs and stuff like that? What are some green flags that you would say for founders who are looking at including an HR person into their team, hiring their first HR manager? And what is some subtle red flags, you would say? Not like clear, in-your-face red flags that people would notice, but something with you and your professions and your experiences, you would say, this is a subtle red flag. This tends to pop up into an issue amongst my peers. And we won't tell anyone what you said.
That's a good question.
That is a good question. I think, well, the first thing that's coming to mind for me is there's sort of a divide that's happened in HR throughout the last 5 to 10 years, where some people, you can see it a little bit in like people who call themselves HR versus people who call themselves people ops. And I think that I don't want to call it a red flag, because I think there's the right fit for everyone in certain places, but specifically in startups, I think looking for someone who, for example, relies less on like traditional HR practices, like a PIP, for example, every single time, and instead look for someone who is more focused on like doing what it takes to make sure the business and the people are successful. It's sort of a subtle mindset shift that I haven't quite figured out how to quantify, but especially a good way to sort of maybe signal to yourself that you should ask about it is if this person has like experience in much larger companies and they're like trying to pivot into a startup. That might be a good time to like have that conversation with them and talk to them about like what their mindset or attitude toward HR and HR best practices is. I don't know. Is that resonating with you?
Definitely. Yeah, I think the other side of that, I think, is if the person wants to be in HR because they want to make people happy, right? Or they want to help people love that, yes. And to your point, the priority is the business's success. And that's, the person has to be able to articulate that that's why. I think especially in a startup, right? Like it is so high stakes every day that we care about people's feelings, of course, but the priority is the business performance, and that I think has to come through.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That point about like, I just want to make people happy, like that is, we make people unhappy with a lot of our decisions. Unfortunately, obviously that's never the goal, but
Yeah.
I think what comes to mind as you ask that question, I think that the green flag has to do with what kind of problems are you anticipating, or what are you experiencing, and can you work with that person to solve them? And as an example, the company that I'm at now, my interview process with my founder and CEO was essentially, this is a problem. We don't have a total rewards philosophy. Why don't we hash it out? We spent, an hour hashing it out. First conversation, we dug into it. I wrote a thing and said, hey, here's my thoughts. The third conversation, he sent me all of their engagement data and said, where would you start with this? Guide me. Let's talk about this as an actual problem. And how would you recommend we do this? And there were parts of it that I was like, okay, what is he looking for? And then I realized, oh, he's just looking for what I think about things. And are we compatible with each other? And, we are a good match. That has not been the case with every CEO and founder that I've ever worked with. And that was a good learning for me to say, oh, I really hate the way you approach this. So I think there's a two-way street when it comes to that. And so the red flag is really just the opposite. It's I don't even know if it's subtle, but if it's we can't work together, I can't give you feedback, I can't, we are having a mismatch in how we would approach this. That doesn't mean either of us are bad. We're just not the right fits for one another.
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is partly a shameless plug, to be honest. But I do have a question that follows up with it. So I'm Taylor Miller-Goulet. I'm one of the co-founders for Monarch Coaching, a transformational leadership development company. And we actually help leaders with problems like these. But my question to you guys is, obviously, there's a balance of soft skills and hard skills in your guys' roles. And to your point over here, we're hiring a lot of experts who don't necessarily, they have the hard skills down, but the soft skills, they might lack a little bit. So where do you find, for you guys who maybe don't have the luxury of leadership development, to hire, because I know that it is an added cost, but where do you find the balance between when you focus on coaching on maybe soft skills versus the hard skills?
I work with engineers and scientists. So I try to quantify it as much as possible. I think, Jenna, you had said it earlier, documenting what the specific expectations are of someone in a leadership or a management position has been really helpful for the teams I've worked with. Even just saying, we expect you to have weekly one-on-ones with your direct reports and cover these 5 bullet points in all of them, right? I think spelling it out for them and giving them a pathway to, or a structure to at least follow, and then being available for the nuance that happens as they're following the structure, right? Being available to help them with those softer skills of delivering feedback or reading a room, no offense, or judging someone's reaction to news you've just delivered or things like that. I think if they're able to work within a structure, then they'll be able to know what questions to ask, rather than just sort of throwing them in the deep end and hoping that they do okay.
Yeah, I think probably asking why they want to do that job in the first place gives you a lot of intel, right? If it's hopefully, I think a lot, the newer HR, I would say, is you can, from a compensation perspective, an IC and a manager can be within spitting distance or even the same. And so it shouldn't be that they're going into it for more money or more power. And so as long as they have a good, to make the team more effective and to lead people through these hard changes, then I'm like, great, we can work with that.
Hey there, I'm Dan, and so for many of my HR people ops colleagues, testing. Now I'm so much louder. So for many of my HR people ops colleagues, we are kind of aware that the PIP is step 9 of a 10-step process. But for a lot of managers who don't have that management training, it's step 2 of a 2-step process. And part of the reason why people like Lexi have jobs is that she knows that there are 10 steps and, helping other organizations learn those 10 steps. So I'm curious, for organizations, especially small organizations that can't get a Lexi on their staff, how do they teach that there are more than 2 steps? And especially, and if you can speak to this, in revenue generating roles, when there's a clear performance metric of success, you either hit your number or we put you on a PIP. Is there another step in between that you can recommend for those types of organizations?
There should always be leading indicators, right, before you miss the revenue goal. And so we've talked about, I don't know if this is totally answer your question, but essentially for the managers in the go-to-market functions, or basically, how many calls are you making every day? How is your Salesforce hygiene? How is your, how many gong calls did your manager listen to give you feedback? And so we've get, on a weekly basis, good data to know. And then you build in, it can be whatever you want in terms of like your warning's going to come at this point and you will have this much time to get it back on track. But I have found when you're that clear, again, for lack of a better phrase, the PIP writes itself, right? The person's like, yeah, I knew this conversation. Quarter just ended. Thank you. I understood that this was exactly where I was going to be. So I don't know if that helps, but I find the earliest indicators prior to like, did you hit the quota or not, can help that go.
So if you're a founder,
Wait.
Here comes the mic.
Thank you.
Hello.
So if we're talking about like founders and early managers who don't know that there's a step 10, I think a huge piece for me was having a strong board who then advises me and says, hey, I know you're having this performance issue. Can you slow down a little bit? Let's talk it through. What's your plan?
Yeah.
I think the board
I love that.
governance at the level we're talking about is huge. So another reason why you got to pick your investors really carefully is like that advisory. So that's just my suggestion on this topic.
The only thing I would add on to that too, this is a theme for me. I love a process, but write it down. And even if you can think about it in advance, and I know with startups, you don't want to spend too much time on this stuff until you actually need it, but do that thought exercise. If you have a co-founder or a leadership team or a board, do that exercise. Like, hey, if someone's having a performance problem, what are the steps that we're going to take so that when we're in the middle of the performance problem and we're all pissed off and we have 8 million things to do, we can go back and make sure that we're following our own rules. And we have a process in place, right? It doesn't need to be super in depth. A lot of larger companies have a KPI dashboard and all sorts of things. And I've tried to do that in a startup. It's not worth it. Truly.
Well, can I just add one thing to it too, which is if you're talking to your board and your board member knows, I had a termination, that employee was frustrated. She called my board member. And he was like, I'm fully aware what's going on here. I fully support what the company's doing, and actually that helped to bring back in. And she's like, okay, I talked to the board member. I was like, I know he called me. But I just think that at this stage, at the early stage, it's just incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to reframe some of these things. And Dan, this speaks to your 10-step instead of 2-step. These things are not a binary. It's not one or the other. They're not here or they're gone. Put things on a continuum as much as possible and really think about the difference between great, we need to course correct to like, ooh, now your job is at risk. And tell them that. I feel like I've said this a couple times already. It's just like, be clear about where someone stands. And you don't need to have that be a high stakes conversation. The only reason it becomes high stakes is because you didn't do it in those earlier pieces. And then it has sort of all bubbled up into, oh my God, we got to take action right away.
Yep.
But I do think that the corollary to that is also when people hear that, it's like, oh God, this is going to take forever, or oh my God, this person needs to be on a 60-day PIP. It doesn't need to be that way. Just tell them that, clarify your expectations. Things can change very quickly, and if they don't, then take more action accordingly. So much of this to me is like reset in terms of continuum, but also like move quickly, and you don't need to drag this out as longer than it needs to be dragged out.
Yeah.
Hi again. Welcome. Sorry. Out of
Did you
curiosity,
just welcome us to our panel here?
yes, I did. Founder mode. What is actually a non-traditional benefit that you would say if more companies were put this into place, there will be less of a need to PIP?
A benefit?
Non-traditional benefits, something like if you looking back at your experiences, like something I noticed amongst the employees that we've pipped over the past, if we had this benefit, for instance, from the ground zero, set this as a company policy, something else, this would have definitely reduced the need to like 60% of the PIPs that we've needed to do didn't need to happen.
I mean, I think it's really just clear communication. Like, it's a set of values that you use as a company to make decisions, and you're consistent with the set of values and how you make decisions using them. And then just a commitment to providing consistent and clear feedback. I don't think people, in my experience, people don't have performance issues because they're not like getting a 401k match. I think they're having performance issues because they either don't know what the expectations are of the role, they don't feel supported by their manager, or they like have other stuff going on outside of work, right? And so I think the only way you're going to know what the root cause is by talking to them and having that like open door policy as a leader. I can't think of any like one benefit that would.
Sorry. Yeah. What you just prompted me to think about is the leave policies can be helpful, right? Like if you recognize that like, oh, somebody close to you passed away, you took 2 days off. Now your performance struggling. You probably need longer time to, so whether that's a bereavement leave policy. And again, I can't track people who went on PIPs based on that, but oftentimes the performance starts to dip because something very difficult is happening in somebody's life. And so to the extent you can give a small window that the company can handle, I don't say that lightly, right? It's difficult to have people on leave in small teams, but that can help the person get the breathing room they need to then come back in and do well.
I've never really thought about this, but I really enjoy the question. Totally different direction here, but if we could provide, training is too simplistic of a word, but if we could provide some kind of training to managers on EQ and communication, through Monarch, clearly. If we could equip managers through professional development with EQ and clear communication guidance, then I think like that would have a big impact. And pulling at your idea, Jenna, of the leave side of things, it's going to be a little wonky, but if organizations had some kind of like generous policy for someone who would like to opt out of the organization because they think that they are no longer the right fit, like, hey, we're going to give you a long tail. We're going to give you 3 months of pay, and we will set you up to find another job if you self-select out of the organization. That also could be an interesting hypothesis around maybe they won't go on a PIP because they know they're not the right fits anymore, and we don't need to go through that exercise. We could give them a graceful pathway to leave.
That's interesting.
I think Zappos did that in onboarding, right? Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your insightful conversation. I'm the other co-founder of Monarch Coaching. Mike, you just sparked something on me as well, because yes, transparency is very important, but make sure co-founders and founders, if you have somebody on a PIP, yes, you're planning something, you're providing feedback, but make sure that when they're doing something good, you're providing positive feedback as well. So you reinforce what you're doing. So Alexi, sorry, you were saying like, how can we rebrand this? You can do it. Maybe not as a company, but as a team, you as the leader, you can rebrand the PIP. The PIP is something that is going to help me I'm going to get good at this job, at this role, and this is going to even help me for the next one. And you as a leader, you can sell it like that. You have the power to like sell this as actually something that you can help your team members to improve, and like the positive recognition, acknowledging that they're doing something good. It goes a long way. So we are responsible, and you talk about EQ, being very social aware of like how my words are rephrasing my PIP and the things that I'm saying, how I'm rephrasing, because words are very, very important. So how I'm communicating the PIP. The PIP it depends, they're gonna take it, depends of how you are communicating that as well. Thank you so much.
So, I'm from biotech pharma side, and I had reports at both places, and even in pharma, I had to go through the PIP plan and actually let go of the person. So you mentioned the reasons for PIP, but I would like to add to that one point is that during the COVID time, it was 2-3 years where there were people who were doing postdocs or were graduating. They kind of missed the practical experiences. And what has happened in Ivy League school, even if they are coming from oncology, Dana-Farber or something, certain labs have become like the postdocs are more managers, project management rather than scientists, because the work is happening at CRO. Now, when they come to industry, you really have clear expectations, and then they can do that. They should be able to, they're coming from these labs, but apparently not, because they have somewhere missed those trainings. And then they have this issue of ego that they are not ready to work through. I almost worked for almost 1 year, and 1 year I was documenting. So imagine I have a role as a senior director, and I am writing PIP plan, like a documenting for 1 year, and then have to think, is it in a diplomatic language, because I'm a little bit of a straight shooter. So the amount of time that took, and eventually that person had to go because there was nothing left, there was no productivity, but it was a long time. So what I have learned is, when we are hiring, like those certain old-fashioned way, or like where you literally have technical questions and also like have a problem for them to solve, so hiring right is becoming, it's getting at another level than what it was 4 years ago when I was hiring.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes back to what Dan was saying earlier. Like, a PIP is step 9 of 10. Step 1 is having a good hiring process, and like making sure your hiring process reflects the competencies that you're looking for in order for someone to succeed at your company, and in order for someone to succeed on the specific team with the specific manager that they're going to be reporting into, and that they like fit the values that you try to operate under, right? So I think like if you don't have a rigorous hiring process, you're gonna have more performance issues, because you're not setting the right expectations up front.
Hi, I'm also from a small coaching firm, and we're not really competitive in our field, so we're like allies. So no in the room competition. But I would just add that, and my name's Donovan, by the way, that I've worked at startups and big organizations, and I've kind of jumped back and forth a few times. And one thing that I think got thrown out with the bathwater with sort of traditional HR is having some sort of annual review and goal setting process. And it's hard in a startup because the goals and the performance expectations are shifting as the business matures or changes, right? But I think when we don't do that, by the time we get to the PIP, it's like, how would that person have known? It's like we're trying to set expectations when it's almost too late. So I would just kind of challenge you, those of you in the room that have some say over this. It doesn't have to be like a check the box, obnoxious, boring, bureaucratic activity to just take a minute and have once or twice a year a formal moment where your managers are sort of working with their people to, check in on goals, set goals, check in on them, and, have a little bit of feedback. And that way you can avoid a lot of the PIPs in the first place. So I just wanted to add that to the combo.
Yeah, total upvote on that. At the end of the day, like people want to know where they stand, and they want to know that like they have a path forward. Honestly, I've created performance reviews where there's no rating system. I hate ratings. If you want to talk about that, let me know. But binary questions at the end. Is this person performing well? Are they ready for the next level? Are they at risk for low performance? Every manager needs to answer those 3 questions, and the employee gets all of that information. And so it's not just like, hey, I'm gonna like fluff a little bit. No, it's you actually need to tell them where they stand, and then the more commentary you could give, the better. But at least like start with that. So big fan.
We've got time for one last question.
So in the event where the PIP unfortunately results in someone leaving the organization, oftentimes you find there's a big impact on the team. It can impact culture. What talking points and advice do you give to managers in that scenario? Obviously, there's a level of confidentiality and discretion that you want to be using. But for the folks in the room that might have to speak to that after someone's exited, what all do you say and advise?
That's right.
It probably does differ by stage, right? Because of the number of people who might know the individual. Our guidance is usually you pull the immediate team together. You say the person's no longer working here. I'm happy to, I can't talk about a lot of this, but what you'll know from me is that if your performance is at risk, you'll know about it. So it's just reassuring them this was not a surprise, and you can count on that from me as your manager. And then all hands on deck to support the work moving forward, and that's tough for people. But just giving them as much clarity on how the work will be covered and who's going to handle what helps. You've got the smaller group.
Same. I think, like you don't want to / legally can't give a lot of detail about the termination. And so you want to take the focus off of like that person and bring it back to like, I promise this wasn't a surprise. You'll, maybe reiterate the steps that you'll take to give feedback to folks if there are performance issues. Focus on what work needs to happen moving forward. Get everybody refocused on the task at hand.
There's a lot of times that the person who exited will talk to their former colleagues. And so you also want to make sure if it was a surprise, it's all the more reason for the manager to feel like it wasn't a surprise, because if they're saying to the team that it wasn't, and then they hear from their former colleague that it was, then there's questions there too. So it gives good accountability, I find.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. We definitely welcome and encourage you to stick around for a couple of minutes post. If you did not get a chance to have your question answered, feel free to connect with our wonderful panelists too. Thank you so much. We have a lot more in store for you guys, not just today, but for the rest of the week. We will be holding our career fair kicking off tonight in this room at 6 p.m. So stick around. However, the next thing that will be going down in this room is CPOs and CEOs. How to find and nurture a shared vision and relationship. If that is not what you're looking for, you will unfortunately need to change rooms and locations, but our lovely folks at the reception desk can absolutely get you to where you need to be. If you are tuning in virtually, stick around. We'll be kicking it off in just a few minutes, so hang tight. Lastly, there are a lot of incredible perks that our sponsors of Startup Boston Week are offering you. Everything from free co-working space to legal hours and much more, as well as partnerships with some of our local restaurants. To take advantage of that, follow the URL. It's SBW, Startup Boston Week, SBW2024.startupboss.org. .org/perks. So thank you again so much. Another round for our panelists. We hope you enjoyed this session and enjoy the rest of Startup Boston Week. Thank you all.